being a man is really just being your authentic self. And if you think about it, it takes more courage. It takes more of a fuck you mindset to be yourself than it does to follow what society thinks masculinity should be.
You're listening to the Building Men podcast with Dennis and Anthony Miralda, brothers on a mission
to help you become the strongest version of yourself, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically.
Anthony Miralda, what's up, bro?
We're back.
I want to start this episode with an interesting fact about me, something weird about me that I recognized yesterday. That I'm driving in my truck, and I dropped off Denny for basketball practice. I'm driving in my truck, and I had to blow my nose. I'm snotty right now. I have a ton of mucus. It's a great way to start the podcast. I blow my nose. You know, and whenever you blow your nose, I look into I look into the tissue, and I love blowing my nose. I recognize it's so fucking weird, but I really enjoy that. It's like very gratifying
when you clean it out. You know, all the snots come out, dude. Literally. So when we were like talking about this beforehand, I was like, "What's something weird I do? What's something weird I do?" And I was gonna say that I've blown my nose into my hand before.
Have you?
Like, that's disgusting.
It's fucking
it's
gross.
So gross. And I'm like, what do I do now? And now I got snot on my... That's just... It's terrible.
So what do you do that's weird that you haven't told anybody about it that's really fucking out there?
Where do I even begin? I feel
you do a lot of weird shit.
There's so many
weird
avenues I could go down. So one of the weirdest things, and somebody called me out on this, it was probably like a year ago. Whenever I'm like excited running up the steps, whatever the steps are, I tend to go like gorilla style on all fours, like a lion, and I'm like galloping, and they're like, "What the fuck was that?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" I'm just getting up the steps, and
Where were you when you did this, or where are you? Do you do this if you're going up the steps at the mall or something?
If I'm really jacked up trying to get somewhere, I noticed that I could like shave off a couple minutes on or like
in your
seconds
life, in the course
in
of
my
your
life.
life.
So imagine that. Imagine how many places I could get to faster if I'm on all fours. I get it.
So weird.
I get the four-legged creatures out there. What we've been missing out.
All right, so we're going to segue over to our guest right now. Our guest is the author of Fucking History, 111 Lessons You Should Have Learned in School, which by that title, the audience knows that we are going to have a lot to talk about right there. Feel free to quote me, a 3-part series, and the last one is Speech Therapy, 52 Pick-Me-Ups to Get You Through Many of Life's What the Fucks. Awesome book. Just got done with it. Can't wait to talk to our guest, Kyle Creek, a.k.a. The Captain. Welcome aboard, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me. I don't know if talking about blowing your nose is contagious like yawning, but I suddenly have to blow mine after hearing that intro. I'm sitting here the whole time. I'm sniffling, trying not to make too much noise as you guys are having your little intro there.
Well, that could be the big thing about this podcast. Everybody comes on and fucking, lets loose, blows up,
Do you ever just plug one nostril when you're in the shower and just really, that's what I find to be that's the most satisfying nose blow you can have is the shower, humidity, and you plug one nostril and just let it go.
It's beautiful. And then you leave there and you're clean and
you got a story about college, right? Didn't you tell?
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
So
You're gonna like this.
So I was walking home from football practice, and I pass by the softball field every time that I walk back from football. And so I'm looking, and there's this first baseman, and she's like, fucking athletic, like probably, big girl, 180 pounds.
I would imagine an athlete would be described as athletic. So thank you for putting that in.
Yeah. You're right.
And there's a couple big beefy girls that I don't know if I would describe as athletic.
Yeah, maybe it makes sense why she was either the catcher or the first baseman. Like, that's where she fits in. But anyway, so I'm walking past her, and I see her, and she's, like, cheering on everybody and getting going, and all of a sudden she just does one nostril, poof, and then the other nostril, poof, and just right in front of me. Both cleaned them out, and I was like, oh, fuck.
That was impressive.
So did you get down on one knee right then and there? Or did you wait?
I can't believe we're not seeing her at Christmas dinner this year. I know.
Surprise.
So, Kyle, to that end, tell us something about yourself in that respect. Some weird fucking thing about you.
I'd say a little known fact that people don't know about me is I actually was a collegiate football player. Hearing your brother talk about it reminded me of, going to the games and myself in college. I quit about 2 weeks into the first season of college football because I decided I liked partying more than sports. I never really liked sports. It's something that was expected of me because I'm 6'6", I'm a bigger guy. And so I don't talk about it much. I actually hate on sports quite often. I talk a lot of shit on people that make sports too large a part of their life. And so not a lot of people know that I actually had a college scholarship for football. I was a defensive end. And yeah, I think that's a little known fact.
Yeah, absolutely. That it doesn't come across in anything that you're doing, and you definitely talk a lot about.
It is not. Yeah, it's not a part of my life it's a part of my life I actually forget about. Most people bring it up to me.
And it's interesting too because I've recognized I was the guy who was so enamored with my baseball team, my football team that I followed, and it would hurt me on Monday morning if the Giants lost on Sunday. I'd get butthurt, and it would affect how I was showing up. Finally, I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like, am I going to make this something that's going to determine how I feel about the world on Monday if my team loses?" It's crazy.
Yeah, I think it's an unfortunate attachment a lot of us have with stuff externally. I mean, I understand the entertainment aspect of sports. I still like to go to the bar and watch a game if my friends are watching it, but I couldn't care less about who wins or who loses. It's that whole idea of living vicariously through someone else's accomplishments that's always really turned me off towards cheering someone on in that aspect. If you can watch sports in a way that's just entertaining, you can enjoy the game and walk away from it, no matter what. I think that's a very healthy way to enjoy sports. But when you see these people naming their kids Dallas Cowboys and that kind of shit, that's just unhealthy. And I think that a lot of people cause themselves, like you said, suffering, and you'll ruin your day or you'll ruin your week over something that's completely out of your control. And that's really, what the book Speech Therapy was about, with all those different situations. And actually, your team losing is one of the chapters I included in there because it's such an attachment that a lot of people have, and one that's very powerful. I mean, if I bet on a game, I like to get in on some parlays with my buddies sometimes just because it makes it exciting to be there. That's about the only time I will pay enough attention to care. But other than that, I mean, sports are great. They're fun. I think being athletic, getting outdoors is awesome. I'm glad I played sports growing up as a kid. I think it taught me a lot of healthy competition. It taught me a lot of teamwork and things that, have benefited me as an adult. But for the most part, I am not a sports fan or anyone that I would consider even like an avid sports guy in the least.
It's interesting too, the attachment, especially that I would say men have to that, living vicariously through their kids playing sports as well. You're a new dad right now, and you talk about it a lot. Like, your philosophy on life, your outlook, the way that you see everything has shifted after you have become a father. You actually put in the book, being a father is like being a farmer. You want to grow something and you don't want it to turn out gross, pretty much. So talk to us a little bit about just how that has impacted your mindset on life after you become a father.
Being a dad is something I was never sure I wanted to be, in my earlier 30s, I kind of thought I'll be one of those guys that becomes a father when he's 50 after I've lived my life. But being a dad has been probably one of the greatest blessings, in the sense that it just opened my mind up to how much bullshit I was worrying about day to day. Having someone to worry about outside of yourself in that capacity, and also just the little things that you deal with as a parent, having your kid like shit on you or just spit up, or it really puts things into perspective, and all the drama and just the focus on, my relationships with my friends and stuff in ways that were unhealthy have just completely shifted to where I appreciate the times I have with people more. And I have so much less patience for the unnecessary stuff in life, like gossip and anything like that comes my way. It's like, I don't have time for this shit. And I was actually talking to my buddy about this last week, and he asked his mom, he's like, how come you never get anxiety? And his mom said to him, when you have kids, you just learn that different things matter. And I couldn't agree with that more. My anxiety, my stress, just the way I was hyper focused on my reputation, or the way people thought of me, had just completely changed to where, if my kid's happy and well taken care of, I know my career is going to flourish. I know everything else is going to come into place. I related a lot to getting a dog. When I got a dog too, I think it kind of knocked me out of a lot of my OCD tendencies. I think when we're alone too long as individuals, it actually has a negative effect on us, where you get caught in these little routines, you get caught in these patterns of thinking, and to where anything outside of that, people see it as something that prevents them from their ability to do absolutely nothing. People start to view all responsibility as something to be, avoided, and everyone wants to be able to cancel plans and stay at home and, protect their mental health. But really, I think by avoiding all that stuff, you're actually doing a detriment to your mental health. I think responsibility is good for you. I think having a pet that'll randomly destroy your shoe one day is good for you, because it teaches you just a bunch of coping skills. It teaches you how to deal with the way, life throws things at you sometimes. And I have buddies that are single. They've been single and they're in their 40s now, and they've been single for, 10 plus years. And I have a hard time being around some of them because they are so anal about so many dumb little things. It's like, man, you need a dog. You need something to come into your life and just fuck shit up to get you out of this mindset of trying to control everything that comes your way.
Absolutely. You posted about it, or no, it's actually a chapter in your book actually about the time that we spent alone during quarantine. You basically said, listen, this might happen again. And the worst thing is when we're alone and then we're looking at social media, we're scrolling through social media. That leads to this depressive state that we might go through as men. What was a lesson that you learned during that time as everything was locked down? You talked, okay, it was going to be 2 weeks and all of a sudden it's fucking a long time. What'd you learn about yourself during that time?
So let me backtrack a bit. So 2019 was a very formative year for me, if anyone was following me at that time. Prior to that, I'd spent a couple years getting a little bit of notoriety on social media. I was actually working as a creative director for a lot of hospitality brands. And so I was traveling constantly. I was on a new flight every 1 or 2 days. I was always in a new city, constantly just staying at nice hotels, going out to bars, just really living the lifestyle I think a lot of young males think is like the epitome of this guy's, living the fucking life. And it just started to wear on me after a while, where I realized I'd lost touch with a lot of my friends. Because if I did see them, it was very quick. We'd get a couple beers, we'd get drunk, and we wouldn't have any deep conversations, and I'd be on to the next city I had to go to. Or I just got so tired of traveling alone, because for the most part I'd travel alone. I'd show up, I'd have a meeting with my client, then I'd have a couple nights to kind of hang out, and I'd meet people. I'm a very social guy. I'd go out, I'd ask people to meet me at bars and stuff, but I never really had like a real connection with anyone, and it just started to kick my ass after a while. And so I quit that job. I moved out of New York City and I moved to LA, and I thought, okay, this is gonna be better for my health. I have some friends in LA. I can enjoy the outdoors a little more. My life's going to slow down a bit. And nothing really changed. I just started kind of yearning for the lifestyle that I felt like I left behind. And I just became incredibly, incredibly depressed. And to everyone else, it still seemed like I was living the life. I had just signed a major book deal with a major publisher. I was still traveling quite frequently, and I had a lot of freedom since I was no longer in that position. But I had no real purpose outside of my work. And my writing became something that I started to despise, because I was no longer writing about what I enjoyed. I was writing what I thought people wanted to read from me. And as a creative, I think that's probably the most detrimental thing you can do, is start performative creation as opposed to, writing what you feel is true. And so 2019 fucked me up. I wrote a post about mental health, telling everyone that I was in a bad place and I needed to take care of it. I had an outpouring of support. I took about a month off social media altogether, deleted all the apps from my phone. I went stone cold sober. I did nothing but read, do therapy, work out, hang out with my family. I moved back to Utah temporarily. And I got out of it in the fall and I was feeling really good. I finished a new book. And then come 2020, I was ready to hit the ground running again. And then all this, obviously quarantine shit happened. And it forced me to go back into the place I thought I'd escape. And so for the first part of quarantine, I became very depressed again. I felt like I'd just kind of overcome this giant, and now life was kneecapping me again. So for the first little bit, I kind of started to slip back into that self-pity state. And that fucked me up. That was probably the worst thing I could have done. And looking back on it now, it wasn't until I made the decision to make the most of it that it really changed for me. That's when I decided I was going to write another book. I was going to, focus on doing all the things that I had never allowed myself to do because I was too busy. I mean, I got in really good shape again. I started working out more than ever. I focused a lot of my stuff just on my relationship. My girlfriend and I had actually broken up for 6 months when I went through my depressive episode, and I didn't think we were going to get back together. And we did, and then a couple months later, we found out she was pregnant. So it kind of all came full circle for me when I'd say I let go of control and I allowed life to kind of just throw things at me, but I made the most of what was thrown at me. And I'd say my career now is probably the best it's ever been. I don't travel as much as I used to. I don't party as much as I used to. My lifestyle online probably doesn't look nearly as badass as it did a couple years ago, but I'm in the best state I've ever been in. And I never thought at this age that I'd already be a dad with a dog and 2 cats living in Miami, Florida. I mean, I always figured I'd stay in New York for a while, or I figured I'd be in LA kind of living that nightlife bullshit writer lifestyle. But I'm glad the way things happened. And I honestly feel like quarantine did a lot of good for me. I think, there's a lot of stuff to talk about there, how it fucked up the world. But for me personally, I found a benefit in all of it.
I think it's Jim Carrey who said, for all those of you who think that being rich and famous is the absolute tits, that's the bomb to be, you should try it for a little bit and recognize we all go through the same shit. We all go through that self-doubt. We all go through that lack of confidence. We all go through that depressive state, and we're all human beings. I think it's Jim Carrey that said that.
Yeah, I think the full quote, he says, for everyone that thinks, being rich and famous is going to make you happy, I hope you achieve everything you want to see it's not the answer.
Yep.
And it's very true. I mean, I'm not a kind of person who's going to talk bad on being successful. I think it's great to be successful. I think it's great to want to make a lot of money. I think it's great to want to have a badass career and be someone of notoriety. I think people should strive for that. And I think a lot of people take quotes like Jim Carrey's as an excuse to kind of sit on their hands and not try as hard in life. Like, oh, well, this is basically demonizing success, where it's not demonizing success. It's demonizing what you attach to that success, which is your individuality and your self-worth. I think that's a big plague we're having in society right now, is people are afraid to brag about their accomplishments because it's seen as being vain. People are afraid to, try to do something big because their friends are like, oh, well, you're just trying to do it for the money. Like, who the fuck cares? If you're trying to do something with your life, do it. It's what you do with that power. It's what you do with that money. It's what you do with those accomplishments that really matter. I have a lot of friends that are incredibly successful, that are very happy because they're doing a lot of good with their power in the world. They're doing a lot of good with what they've been given. And I have a lot of friends that are some of the most miserable fucks I've ever met that I actually have a hard time being around, who are also mega successful. It really goes back to what I was saying. It's like when life throws your way, it's kind of what you make out of it. And I don't think people should use, cautionary, statements like Jim Carrey's as an excuse to not try, which I think too many people do, and they're becoming way too comfortable with complacency.
Absolutely. And when you think about, we have one fucking time here. Let's make the most out of everything and be the most badass you can possibly be without all those excuses. Talk to us a little bit about what you've seen in your work. The biggest problem facing men today, like what would you say if somebody's like, hey, Cap, what do you think is the biggest thing that men are dealing with right now or struggling with?
I'm sure I could probably think of a different answer if I thought on it longer, but I think probably one of the biggest things that a lot of men are struggling with is just authenticity. I think men are afraid to be men these days. I'm not going to go so far as to say there's a war on men. I know it's a popular thing to talk about, but I think a lot of guys are just lost. I think they idolize the wrong individuals. I think they are afraid to embrace who they truly are, in the sense that you might not want to be a playboy, but that doesn't mean you're a loser. I mean, I think guys look at the Dan Bilzerians of the world, and a lot of guys look up to someone like that and think, okay, this is the ultimate example of masculinity, where it's not. There's a lot to be said about men who are in stable relationships, who are fathers, who work 9 to 5 hardworking jobs, that are really good dudes, that live their life with integrity, that live their life honestly, and they're authentic. And I think it's probably something that's plaguing much more than just men. I think the world suffers from a lack of authenticity, especially now, where I think a lot of people are afraid to speak their truth, or they're afraid to even admit they believe something is true, because the online mob will come after you if it's something that differs from a mainstream opinion. And so everyone feels just so suffocated with an inability to be themselves. And the people that they see as examples of being themselves most likely aren't being themselves. And I use Dan as an example because I actually, have some friends that are close to him, and I know some of the other group that he runs around with. And a lot of those dudes are fucking miserable. A lot of those guys are completely different in real life, and they're either actually very relaxed, chill, calm individuals, and they put out this persona that they're kind of like boisterous and badass, but they're actually very reserved, or they're just completely, the opposite of what they portray themselves to be, because they're trying to promote this lavish lifestyle as the way to happiness, or as the way to get you to buy into whatever they're selling. And I just think there's a huge discrepancy of people promoting the right things. And I think it's just integrity, authenticity, honesty. You're not going to want the same things as everyone else, and that's fucking great. You're not going to need to be like these other men or women or anyone else online who look like they have it together, and that's also fucking great. You should find what makes you fulfilled. You should find what makes you passionate about getting up every day. And I know it sounds cliche, but that's the truth. And maybe that's not being on social media at all. Maybe you just want to have a super quiet life and get married and have a couple kids. And guess what? That's not a bad idea. I mean, I think society tends to look down on that, saying like the traditional family model is kind of dead. But if that's what you want in life, awesome. I have friends that that's all they want, and I think that's fucking great. I have friends that want to be, billionaires with a B, and they'll tell you that. They're like, I'm not going to be happy till I'm a billionaire, and that's fucking great. But as long as you're being authentic and pursuing what is you, I think that's the right way to live your life.
The Building Men program, or the whole movement behind Building Men, started way back in 2005, and I'm working with kids as an assistant principal. It's a group of young men, and I talk to them about what do they think it means to be a man? Like, what does that actually mean to them? And what they did, Cap, was they developed this idea in their mind through their experience, through their friends, through what they were seeing in media, was if you were a better athlete, that meant you were a better man. That's what they were thinking. The more girls you bang, that means you're a better man. And then the more zeros at the end of your bank account means that you're a better man. So that was what they believed masculinity meant. So now you're a father of a son. How would you tell him, son, this is what it means to be a man? This is what it actually is.
I think being a man is being yourself. And I think that's what a lot of people suffer with. I mean, my dad, for example, is probably one of the most authentic, trustworthy, masculine men I've ever known. I mean, when I was in high school, my dad bench pressed 675 pounds. I mean, my dad was a powerlifter. He's a fucking huge dude. And he's a delivery truck driver, and he lives in a rented, apartment attached to someone's home. And, he doesn't drive fancy cars, doesn't have a big title. But my dad is what I would consider like a man. And he raised me and my brothers very well. He raised us to pursue our own interests in life. I mean, my dad is the reason why I became an entrepreneur. My dad is the reason why I put fucking history out. I was actually at a hotel in Washington, D.C. in the lobby waiting for my car to pick me up. And I was texting my dad, and I think it was, probably fall, around October time. And I said, I really want to put a book out of like a history book, but I don't think I have the time to do it. And my dad, for like 3 days, would just call me every morning and say, hey, have you started that book? Have you started that book? And he was just hounding me, saying, if you don't write that book, you're going to regret it. And so my dad's the reason why that first book came out. And really, he was just encouraging me to pursue what he knew would fulfill me. And it's different than what fulfills him. It's different than what fulfills my brother. I mean, my older brother's a doctor. My younger brother's a journeyman electrician in Seattle. We all have dramatically different lifestyles. But our dad raised us to just find that lifestyle that made sense to us. And so maybe you want to be an athlete and you want to crush other athletes. That's fucking awesome. Good for you. Like, you should try to be the best at whatever you do. Maybe you don't, and that's also fucking great. So I think being a man is really just being your authentic self. And if you think about it, it takes more courage. It takes more of a fuck you mindset to be yourself than it does to follow what society thinks masculinity should be. And if you want to meet someone who truly, doesn't give a fuck, which doesn't exist, everyone gives a fuck to some extent. But if you want to meet someone who truly doesn't give a fuck, it's someone who's pursuing their life despite what other people think about it.
Love that. So you mentioned the fucking history, 111 lessons you should have learned in school. Pick out one or two from that book that you're like, this, for me as a former educator, former principal, I talk about it all the time. The shit that we teach in school is such bullshit. We need to refocus and shift education in a different way. So pull out one or two of the lessons from that book that you'd love the audience to hear about.
So the premise of that book was saying like the lessons you should have learned in school is the book is meant to teach you concepts or to teach you coping skills or to teach you ways to deal with situations that we're all going to deal with. You said earlier, you know, we all deal with the same shit, whether we're celebrity or not. The premise of that book was to show people we all deal with the same shit, whether you lived 1,000 years ago or today. And I used examples of kings and queens and very powerful individuals who dealt with heartbreak, who dealt with being betrayed, who dealt with people not believing in them. And it doesn't matter whether you're, you know, attempting to be an athlete today or you're attempting to conquer a country 1,000 years ago, you deal with the same emotions. Like our emotions of humans have not fucking changed. Our technologies have, our ways of life have. Some would say for the better, some would say for the worst, but our emotions are the same. And so I like the story I opened it with, which is about, you know, being ghosted by someone, which, you know, is all too common in dating today. And I think a lot of people allow it to really crush their confidence. And so I open with the story of Edith Wharton, who was a very, you know, famous author. She was the first woman ever to win a Pulitzer Prize for her work writing novels. And she had someone that she was completely infatuated with, another writer, and she thought for sure they were going to be together forever. And he just up and left her one day. And for years afterwards, she wrote letters trying to regain that connection with him. And she wrote about 400 letters in total. He never responded to anything, but she didn't let it wreck her life. She didn't let it, you know, weigh her down. She went on to write several novels. She went on to be a reporter on the front lines of World War I. She was one of the only journalists allowed into the trenches with the actual troops. And she retired in, you know, the French countryside in a fucking manor with, you know, massive gardens. Like she went on and kicked ass in life. And I like that story because she didn't sit there and let this ghosting situation haunt her. She didn't let this rejection haunt her, you know, per se. And I think rejection is something that destroys a lot of people's dreams. And I remember once in school being taught how to deal with rejection. I don't remember being taught anything about how to deal with that kind of emotional turmoil, which I think if you have a healthy mechanism of dealing with rejection and turning it into something positive and using it as fuel or either learning something from it, that's going to propel you farther in life than anything you're ever going to learn in like a traditional math or social studies course.
You also talk about in the book this idea of catastrophizing, like taking something that is you know a smaller thing and then making it such a bigger thing, or this you call it a cognitive distortion that causes us to jump to the absolute worst possible conclusion. Talk to us a little bit about that and you know where you developed that idea in your book, or how did you make it work in your book?
Yeah, so this is in my new book, Speech Therapy, You're talking about, but I still do that. We all do this shit. I think it's natural. It's natural human tendency to look at the worst case scenario. You can just find a way to rein it in to where you're not doing it so often. But, you know, say, for example, you lose your job. The first thing you're going to do when you lose your job is you start tallying all the things that's going to affect in your life. You start thinking, oh, shit, how am I going to pay for this car? How am I going to pay for this house? If you have children, how am I going to take care of them? Which is normal. You should kind of go through a checklist of things. That's kind of how you assess a situation. But we do that again and again and again. And we'll do it for days on end. And we'll start to think, oh, shit, what if I don't get a job for a month? What if I don't get a job for 6 months? What if I don't get a job for a year? And we'll basically paralyze ourselves with just this fear of how bad it could get. When in reality, after that initial assessment of what needs to be taken care of, you should start using that brain power to think of a way out of it. And if you can use that energy in a positive way, it's going to completely change the way you live your life, but it's also going to get you back on track more quickly than anything. There's no good in catastrophizing the situation. I mean, for a relationship, for example, you know, when someone has their first heartbreak, they catastrophize that like it's something that no one's ever dealt with in life besides them. They tend to think like they're the only one who understands it, and they'll talk to their friends and family, and they'll say, oh, you don't get it. You don't get it. No, they fucking get it. Everyone's had their heart broken. Billions of people on this planet have had their heart broken. People get it, and guess what? They get through it. And there's a lot of people who would tell you their first heartbreak is the best thing that ever happened to them. You just can't see it at the time because you're catastrophizing how painful it is. And it should hurt. It's going to hurt. I'm not saying you should be able to break up and just walk away the next day like nothing bothers you. If anything, that's probably the worst way to handle it. You need to allow yourself to feel those emotions, but you can't allow yourself to dwell on those emotions in the most extreme fashion to where they just destroy your ability to live. I mean, I've had friends who have been broken up with and they've never recovered. Like they're a different person 5 years later, 10 years later, and they wonder why their life is not where they want it to be, or they wonder why they can't trust anybody, or they wonder why, you know, they have such a hard time dating. It's like, dude, it's because you never healed from what happened to you when you were 19. You actually made the catastrophe much worse by trying to ignore it. So you need to feel it. You need to sit in your ship, and then you need to get over it.
And in the book, Cap, it's like, is it all right if I shorten it to Cap instead of Captain?
You can call me whatever you want.
I took some liberties right there.
Took it upon yourself.
Basically, the book, 52 lessons that the thing that I love about it so much is they're easily to consume chapters about different things that we all deal with, the shit that we're thinking about that no one talks about. One that really resonated with me was butting heads, that chapter. It's page 20 in the book, and I took a ton of notes around it. And shit that I dealt with in my past was avoiding conflict, people pleasing, trying to make the situation okay by me bending who I was authentically, and it was slowly eroding at my soul for a long time until I really dealt with that shit. Like you just mentioned, I needed to do that work internally, and so I'll pull out a quick quote from that chapter. There are two truths in every relationship, be it romantic or platonic. You will have disagreements and you will have compromises. However, fear of the first should never be the reason for the latter. I underline that. I'm going to fucking put it up on my refrigerator to remember that all the time, that we can't let fear be the reason that we compromise. We can't be afraid of a fucking situation by changing who we are to make someone else happy.
This kind of goes back to what I've been saying all along. I think inauthenticity is the biggest problem plaguing men, or just society in general these days. And that's exactly what that quote is about. I mean, if you're afraid to be yourself, you're never going to be happy in that relationship, because that person doesn't even know the real you. If you're compromising to keep someone else happy when you know it's like goes against what you really want, you're teaching that person to love or admire a false you, which is what a lot of people also do on social media. So then when there is a time that you really need to be yourself, you have so much self-doubt, you're not going to do that. And that's what's happening on social media. That's what happens in relationships. That's what happens at jobs. We compromise ourselves so much that when we need to be ourselves, or we need to have that courage to actually step up, we don't do it. And that's when you make the really critical mistakes, the stuff that you look back on and go, damn, that fucked my life up. I'd go so far as to say the majority of the problems I've ever had in my life, and in probably most people's lives, are due to bad communication. It's either you being afraid to say what you really think, or it's you being afraid to accept what someone else really thinks. Those two things in life will either fuck up a lot of things for you, or they'll make a lot of things a lot better. You'll either get out of situations that are wasting your time, or you'll stop wasting your time pursuing situations that aren't right for you. And so, like, I mean, I'm sorry to, kind of become like a broken record at this point, but that inauthenticity that's going on right now is the major issue in society.
Totally agree, and that's not that we wanted to beat a dead horse with it, but that's such a powerful point in everything that you're talking about, is being okay with being you, letting the world see the fuck you are, and not being ashamed of it. You put out a post a while back. You're standing, you're fishing, your fucking pants are around your ankles, and it's the 35 lessons you learned in your 35 years. And for the Building Men audience, if you send an email to buildingmencoach@gmail.com, the first 10 people to do so with this quote, "Hippos are fucking dicks," we're going to send you a free copy of the book, Speech Therapy. So the first 10 people that send the quote, "Hippos are fucking dicks," will get a free copy of the book. Tell us why you put that in there. The rest of it is like, your past will kill you if you let it. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's delusion. All those things, and then hippos are fucking dicks. I love it.
It's because it's true. It's as true as everything else I said in that list. I mean, I think growing up, I remember thinking like hippos are just these big cuddly creatures, but then I watched a bull, I think they're called bull hippos, the males, eat like a calf because it wasn't his offspring, and I was like, man, that is fucking brutal. And I just think it's something more people should know. I mean, my first stuffed animal that I can remember as a kid was a big plush hippo. I actually remember this vividly. that I had this big plush hippo in my bed, which it seems odd to have a fucking predator that's that ruthless raise your child. And so I just feel like throwing it in there because I don't think enough people know how brutal the animal kingdom is. And also it was kind of just a reminder that nature's fucked up. I mean, if you follow that Nature is Metal page on Instagram, I'm fascinated with that stuff. I grew up in Utah. I grew up, catching rattlesnakes. I grew up, chasing God knows what through the woods. Me and my brothers and our friends, we'd take our 22s or we'd borrow one of our dad's revolvers and we'd just trape off into the woods and get into all sorts of stuff. And so I've always been fascinated with nature. I love the animalistic, part of life. And so that's why I threw it in there. It's true. And it just kind of, appeals to my passion for wildlife.
I love when people talk about like, we need to be more like animals. I was like, oh, okay, so we just rape and kill everything all the time. I'm like, I don't.
You want to talk about what's crazy is people that like to always say, we're no better than chimpanzees, or they use chimpanzees as like examples for all sorts of things. Chimpanzees are fucking mean. Those are some of the most brutal creatures. I watched a video, and they're intelligent as all hell too. I watched a video of a bunch of chimpanzees hunting spider monkeys. And so they basically have a bunch of chimps at one end of the forest. They have a large chimp act as a flusher, and he'll scare the spider monkeys down to where all the other chimps are hiding. And they just catch these things and start ripping them apart and eating them like chicken wings. Jeez. And it's like their way of just having like a treat or some sport. And if you've never seen a chimpanzee tear another monkey in half and eat it raw, you have no idea how fucked up the animal kingdom is. And then on top of that, male chimps, when they come over and take over a previous alpha male's territory, they'll do similar things that hippos do. Like if there's offspring that isn't theirs, they'll literally pull that offspring right off the mom and they'll eat it. That's fucked up. And so people that are like, oh, we're no better than chimps. Like, no, we're better than chimps. Trust me, dude. There's people that still do fucked up shit like that. I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer and guys like that exist. But for the most part, we don't need to be more like animals. They're very fucking brutal. And if we lived our life that way, there'd be a lot more people claiming that society is out of whack. I mean, people talk about, being offended by words or being offended by these little dumb things online these days. It's like, God, 200 years ago, you would take your kid to go watch a public beheading in the town square, and that was like entertainment. The world hundreds of years ago is so much more brutal than it is now. We have different things we deal with, emotionally. I think emotionally, we're probably in a worse place than we were. But as far as like physically and just the way we live in general, the world is so much more fucked up in the past.
100%. Yeah. Would you rather be stuck in a room with a hippo or 3 chimpanzees?
A hippo. Hippo. Have you because the thing about chimpanzees too is I've actually done a lot of research, and I've got there's a couple of years I got really into this, looking at like what chimpanzees would do. But they're so intelligent, they know if they attack you, the 3 areas they're going to go after first is they're going to go after your eyes. And so they gouge your eyes out. They bite your fingers off because they know these are weapons. And they rip off your genitalia. And so if you look up like zookeepers that have been attacked by their chimps, or people who have been attacked, males specifically that have been attacked by chimps in the wild, it's always those 3 characteristics. They go for your face, they tear your hands off, and they tear off your balls. If you have 3 animals all trying to do that one thing to you that are 10 times stronger than you for body weight, you're fucking done, man. I feel like a hippo, if I could shuck and dive one good time, I feel like I could get out the door. But there is no person on earth that could survive 3 chimps.
And if you think you're having a bad day, just remember you could get your nuts ripped off by a chimpanzee. So just to put it in perspective.
Exactly. Any day I actually talked about this on another podcast, completely different, but my dog got into the avocado tree in the backyard of this Airbnb the other day, and I have a Great Dane. He's a big dog. And that night he got diarrhea. So I woke up the next morning and he had explosive diarrhea all over the guest room of this Airbnb. And that was not what I wanted to wake up to. And so I was telling this other guy, any day I wake up and my dog hasn't shit all over the guest room is a good day. So I think the same applies to that. Any day you wake up and you still have your dick and balls intact because you haven't interacted with the chimp, I think you should take that as a positive and take that momentum and carry it into your day.
It's a win.
And that might be the name of this episode. Why fucking not, right? Any day you wake up with your dick and your balls and you haven't been attacked by the chimp, let's fucking go. We're winning right there. So tell us where you got the nickname from. Where did the captain come from?
So a lot of people ask me this. I don't answer it too often because it's kind of a long story. But in my early 20s, actually, it's not a long story. In my early 20s, I was pretty rowdy. I don't know why. I had a chip on my shoulder, and when I went out to bars, I went to bars with the intention of getting kicked out of that bar. And it was fun for a lot of friends around me. I had a lot of fun at the same time. But my friends just started calling me the captain because they said going out with me was like getting on a ship and waiting for it to sink. Like you were kind of stuck on that boat and you just waited for Kyle to run it into an iceberg. And I hate to live up to my name Kyle as much as I did in my early 20s, but I was a rowdy dude and I had a lot of things to work out, and I'm glad that I kind of went through that. I think I got a lot of this shit out early in my life that, men in their midlife crisis time start to kind of look back on and wish they've done. I've probably done to the nth degree multiple times. So that's where the nickname came from. And then I kind of wanted to I started using the nickname online because at the time I was working for an advertising agency. It was one of my first like really good jobs as a writer. And I'd always tried to make money as a writer. I actually lived at home till I was 26 because I couldn't find a job that supported me enough to live out on my own. I was tour managing bands, and so I'd go on tour and I came back and I would just crash in. My parents had like an apartment attached to their house. I would live there when I wasn't out, and I got my first job as a writer, and I just really did not want to fuck it up. I was so stoked that someone was finally paying me enough that I could have a truck and an apartment, money to travel through my written word, that I used the captain online because I was paranoid someone would find out that Kyle Creek was the one saying like these controversial statements. Even though I stand by everything I've said, and I think, most of what I've said is my authentic self, I just didn't want that convoluting my career. And so I used the captain online for many years. And then it got to the point that clients started wanting to work with me because they knew I was the captain. And I was in New York one time meeting with a Ritz-Carlton property, very prestigious hotel brand. I was meeting with the asset managers for that property. And I was sitting in this meeting and I kind of, thought I was incognito. And one of the asset managers, probably a guy in his late 50s, nudges me and he goes, "Hey, my wife loves your Instagram posts." And I was like, "What the fuck?" And he shows it to me and he's like, "Yeah, me and my wife think you're hilarious." And that was like the first time my worlds had really collided like that. And I was like, "Oh, damn, this is cool." Like people are not repelled by the idea that I have this very outspoken persona. They actually respect it. And I started getting more work and better projects because of it, because people knew that if I did come to the table, I was going to be honest. I'm not going to waste their time in meetings. I'm not going to, beat around the bush if something needs to change. And that's kind of when I started being okay with people knowing, both. But I didn't put my real name on my Instagram profile until I came back from that depressive leave in 2019 when I took some time to really work on myself. I came back and I wanted to be more open with people. After admitting to 500,000 people, you want to kill yourself. There's not really much else that can embarrass you. So when I came back from that, I was like, all right, I'm going to go by Kyle Creek first. That is who I am. A lot of people still know me as this captain character. So I'm still going to keep writing under that because people have associated my work with that for, 5, 6, 7 years at this point. But yeah, I have no problem, people, knowing my business at this point. And like I said, a lot of people do want to work with me because they know what I've done online.
You mentioned that a lot of the stuff that you put out there was controversial, and you were okay with it because it was who you are. Going back to the whole authenticity thing, what's something that you put out there that got the most pushback? Or you're like, damn, I fucking said that, and I got a lot of shit coming back my way?
I can't think of a particular one at this time. A few times I've said stuff where people have kind of attempted to start a little rally to cancel me online. It never really goes far because, for one, I don't feed it. I think a lot of times when people are afraid they're going to be accused of something they're not, they step back too much and they allow that narrative to take over and they allow it to start to consume them rather than be like, nip it in the bud and be like, no, this is what I said and this is why I stand by that. If you're willing to stand up for yourself from the get-go, a lot of people will respect that and they'll actually understand why you did what you did. And so for people that are afraid to speak out online or say what they really think about a situation for fear they're going to get some blowback, you're going to get blowback anytime you say something controversial. Just make sure what you're saying is truthful enough that you're willing to stand by those controversial statements. Don't just say stuff to try and get a reaction, or don't just say stuff because your friends are saying it. Say stuff that you believe in, and when people attack you for it, it's going to be upsetting the first few times it happens, but after a while you're like, damn right, this is what I said, and here's why I said it. And if you disagree with it, that's awesome, but this is me, this is my life, and this is what I want to say. And you see people that do that. I think a lot of people have a lot of respect for Dave Chappelle in particular, because he does this. And people have never been able to successfully cancel his career no matter what he says, because for one, he knows what he's saying is a joke, or he knows why he's saying it, but he doesn't give up on himself. He doubles down. He stands by what he does. He's like, listen, I'm a comedian. This is why you guys listen to me in the first place. And he doesn't go anywhere. And I think, Joe Rogan does the same thing. Joe Rogan's not afraid to, stick to his guns when he says something. And that's why those guys have careers that continue on, is because they are being themselves. Dave Chappelle is not saying shit that he doesn't think is not funny. He thinks it's funny. He's willing to say it, and that's why he's willing to stick behind it. Joe Rogan believes what he believes. He's willing to say it, and he's willing to stick by it. And so when it comes down to people who have tried to throw that stuff back at me, the only time I've ever second guessed myself is when I've thought on it longer to be like, you know what? That probably isn't as accurate as would have liked to have portray it, because now I'm having a hard time defending it. And that makes you feel guilty, and that'll give you the self-doubt, but also at the same time, it just serves as a reminder to me to be like, listen, I have a huge platform. I owe it to myself and others to say what I think. So if stuff like this does happen, it's just better for everyone. I'm willing to stand by it, and what I'm saying is something that I truthfully believe.
And in regards to controversy, all those fucking hippo lovers out there, you can suck a bowl of dicks.
Yeah, fuck you.
Yeah, all that fucking controversy
don't need your
around
kind
that.
out here.
I don't think it's possible to suck an entire bowl of dicks. You could definitely eat them, but sucking them is a lot
All
of
at the
shit.
same time.
From experience, it's not possible. He's correct.
I can see why you left elementary education.
I was actually in middle school. It's more of a middle school joke, the bowl of dicks, right?
I could still see why you had to leave your vice principal job.
So talk to us a little bit about your process for writing. I'm fascinated with, do you have your specific routine when you are in that creative mode to get something out on paper? What do you go through?
For years, I didn't have a routine. I actually wrote about this morning, and on my Instagram. I prided myself on not having a routine. I thought that's what made me more creative. I would take notes. I have a note app on my phone, and whenever I see something that I think I can make a relation between, similar to what a comedian would do, I'll make a note to work on that later. A lot of my tweets, for the most part, I just fire them off in the moment. I'll be driving. If I have something hit me, I'll pull over and I'll type it out before I lose that thought. So a lot of that stuff spur of the moment. As far as my books, my writing process for those has changed from book to book. My history books, I wrote very slowly, where I do a little piece at a time, because I had to do a lot of research to make sure what I was portraying was, accurate, and I have to fact check through multiple sources. But with my speech therapy book, I was so in the mindset. I think I busted the first draft of that out in about 3 weeks. And I wrote every night for about 6 to 7 hours, every night for about 3 weeks straight. And then from there, it took about another month doing 3 to 4 hours a night of editing to really refine it. And so that book was really compressed and tight, but I prefer to write at night. I used to prefer to write in the morning, but now with having a dad and being a dad and having a dog, it's easy for me to get up, get all my family duties done, go to the gym, get all my emails and my work stuff done. And once I have everything off my plate that way, and I know the rest of the day is mine to do what I want to do with, I can put in headphones and I can really get to work writing. So I don't have a super regimen and routine that some writers do. There's the Japanese author, Haruko Murakami, who gets up at 6 a.m. and he runs a half marathon, then he writes for 4 hours, then he has tea with his wife, and then he writes for 4 more hours, then he runs another half marathon, and he does that. It's intensely ridiculous, and he does it for 90 days straight. His writing routine is just, it's ape shit. I mean, any writer, if you Google like Haruki Murakami writing routine, I don't think he runs 2 half marathons any day, but I know he runs at least one. He's incredibly regimented, and I think a lot of that just kind of comes down to his culture, being raised in that Japanese culture of just like that hyper focus. But then there's other writers that I think are probably very loose with it. I think the perception is a lot of writers like to write drunk, which I think is actually something that just society has romanticized. I have done that quite a few times, but I wake up and it's usually garbage. Even like Ernest Hemingway, who people tend to think is like the godfather of drunk writing, he would write early in the morning. He would get up and he would write early in the morning, and he'd be done by lunchtime. And then he'd get drunk and do his, Ernest Hemingway lifestyle. But he was still a guy that was pretty focused and regimented in his work. So yeah, I think there's a lot of variety. I think you just find it works for you as a creative. Likewise with like a painter. But mine's changed from book to book. I'm gonna start another book here pretty soon, and that routine's gonna be differently just based on how the book's gonna come together. I know I'm gonna have to do a different routine for that one as well.
What's the premise of the new one?
I'm not gonna tell you that.
All right, it's gonna be like a special building men secret right there. You mentioned your father was your hero. You basically talked about this pillar of masculinity in your life and how you saw him as this really masculine man. How about an author that was an influence to you? The way
Mark
that they
Twain.
wrote. Mark Twain is your guy.
Mark Twain. Mark Twain is by far probably my favorite author. I really like Shel Silverstein as well, and I think it's because I grew up as a child. My mom was an English major, and she actually was my editor for a while. She actually was my editor on this latest book, Speech Therapy. She was the first one to see the first draft because she wanted to kind of rekindle that relationship we had where she edited my work. She had just told me at one point my work had gotten too profane for her to read. But I think she's worked past whatever hiccups she had there, and she was willing to edit this last book for me. But she loved Mark Twain growing up, and so I grew up reading a lot of Mark Twain. My mom encouraged me to read a lot. And when we were kids, we had what we called this like world map. My mom put up in her bedroom, and she would reward us with travels around the world based on how many pages we read. So like if you wanted to travel from, United States to Australia, for example, you'd have to read like 10,000 pages or something. It probably wasn't that much, but it was just a way as us kids to like feel like we were getting something out of our work. And then on top of that, if we read, we wouldn't have to do chores. So it was like you can either mow the lawn for $4 for your allowance, or you can read a book for $4. And I always chose the reading route. There was one summer I bet I read, 3 dozen books between, the school year starting, and that was probably in like 7th or 8th, now it's probably like 4th or 5th grade actually. And I was just cranking books out because I didn't want to do chores. So I read a lot of Mark Twain. I've always respected how honest he is. And I try to emulate him in my writing in the sense that he's not apologetic for things that he says are offensive. And he stands by the things he says that offend people because he knows they're either inherently human or he knows it's like true. Like what he writes is accurate and it offends people. And I think it offends people because they know it's true and they just wish it wasn't. And so I try and emulate that and sticking by my word. And I mean, he's also what many consider the first stand-up comedian. So he had a lot of wit. He had a lot of clever ways of looking at the world. And then I like Shel Silverstein, and you can actually see Shel's influence in my books. That's where I got the idea for the real simple line art illustrations. Because Shel Silverstein had a way of communicating very complex human emotions or very complex situations in very artful, simplistic ways. And so as a kid, I remember reading, like The Giving Tree or The Missing Piece or Where the Sidewalk Ends, like all his collections of poems. And if you read them now as an adult, you realize how much life lessons were actually in those. But as a kid, they just entertained you. And so I was trying to bridge that gap with my work to have it be a little more deep and longer form, but entertaining enough. And you already, you hit on that earlier. They're like short, digestible chapters. And I did that on purpose because a lot of self-help books, and I've read a lot of them myself, either in research or just out of curiosity, they're so fucking heavy and there's so much information, you can't enact any of it. There's just too much. And you're almost like, it's like paralysis by analysis. Like there's just so much going on in the book. You either don't finish it or you don't apply any of it. And that's why books like The Four Agreements are also very popular, because that's a book you can read in a weekend and you can apply that stuff instantly. Don Miguel Ruiz wrote that book in a very digestible fashion. And so I kind of like had all these different influences, and I wanted to do something similar. And I like the chapter format I have because you can always return to those chapters in the moment. Like if you lose your fucking keys and before you look, you turn to that chapter and read the chapter about finding something you've lost, I guarantee you're going to be better off because of it. Or if like someone breaks up with you and before you go out with your friends and start taking shots of Fireball and acting like an asshole, acting like you don't feel heartbreak, if you read that chapter about being broken up with, it will help you. But also, you can read it all at once and then try and think back on it. But I like that it's a book you can constantly return to. It's a book you can pick up and put down. I don't even remember the question you asked. I went off on a tangent, but
it was about an author that really influenced you, and The Giving Tree too. I challenge you not to read that and get misty-eyed. That book always gets me.
The Giving Tree,
absolutely.
Fantastic. I love Shel Silverstein. I actually went back and repurchased a lot of his books lately because they're either at my parents' house now or I just kind of forgotten how much work he'd put out there. But yeah, he's a stud. Shel's a good dude.
You even have a chapter about, all right, you got some fucking nudes out there. You sent a nude to someone, nude picture, and it's out there. How many times, brother, has that happened to you, right?
Oh, boy. I just sent you one this morning just to be like, hey, how you doing?
So you
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Here we go.
So that's another one of those things. Any day you wake up and your brother doesn't send you a dick pic, it's a good day.
So we got a nice list. We're constructing a nice list here.
Absolutely. Hey, no chimpanzees in my bedroom this morning. Amazing.
No brother dick pics.
I would love to know about you mentioned your mom is editing the books. You talked about your dad. Has there been an instance in your life where you put something out there where it caused a rift in a relationship with a friend, a family member by something that you wrote?
Not that I know of. Not that's been brought to my attention. I'm sure it's happened. I actually, have written quite a bit of stuff about people in the moment. So if any of my friends, are keen enough to be like, damn, we just talked about that yesterday and he's tweeting this, there's a good chance I'm tweeting about our situation. But I think most of my friends and most of my family know I'm pretty blunt and honest and straightforward. And so I've never written anything about someone that I wouldn't have as a conversation with them in person. So I can't think of a situation that's happened to me, or if it has, no one's really voiced it to me.
So before we end the episode, Anthony, open up for any last questions.
Yeah, so we like to end all these podcasts with what would be one piece of advice you can give to the people listening to this that they could start tomorrow if they wanted to?
Get comfortable being yourself. Get comfortable being yourself online. Get comfortable being yourself in your profession, in your relationships. It's going to take time. It's one of those things that you kind of have to acquire a taste for, similar to like drinking wine. Like I hated wine at first, but after a while I started to really appreciate it. And it's going to be the same with putting yourself out there. It's going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to question yourself a lot. But then when there are times that you really need to stand up for yourself, you're not going to second guess yourself. You're going to be prepped for it. And those are the decisions that are going to dramatically affect your life. When you're hit with a hard choice of whether to get divorced or not, or you're hit with the hard choice of moving across the country, you're going to have such a built-up repository of positive experiences from when you've bet on yourself that you're going to be able to do it when it really matters. And so, again, we're talking about beating a dead horse. That's what I see the big issue with, is a lot of people are just afraid to be them, pursue what they want to pursue. Who cares what other people think about it? It might not be the lifestyle that others want, but it doesn't mean your lifestyle is the wrong choice. You're going to have friends that are going to give you advice because their wants and needs are different than yours. Like your friends might tell you, oh, no, you should take that job, or, oh, no, you shouldn't get in that relationship, because guess what? They themselves probably wouldn't, and that's fine. It doesn't mean their advice is the right advice for you. So you got to really get comfortable, doing that. And it takes time, but start with little things, Next time you have a disagreement with your significant other or your boss, like speak up for yourself. Like tell them why you don't agree and why you feel a certain way. And maybe you'll learn something, maybe you won't, but you're going to get comfortable with doing you.
All right, Captain, where can the Building Men audience find you? How can they get in touch with you?
Instagram, SGRSTK, but if you just search the Captain, it'll come up. And then on Amazon, if you just search like the Captain books, all of mine should probably appear towards the top. Speech Therapy, Fucking History, the Feel Free to Quote Me series, those are all available on Amazon. Fucking History is available in Barnes & Noble. I went through a major publisher with that one, so you can kind of get that book everywhere. And I'm sure that they'll be able to find me on a link on one of your pages soon enough. So they'll be able to get to me if they need to.
Check us out on Instagram, building.men. Our website is buildingmen.io. Email us, buildingmencoach@gmail.com. Visit our sponsors, FTR Apparel, FinishTheRaceApparel.com, and Become Stronger Industries, the maker of handmade badass fucking steel maces. We have a retreat coming up April 28th through May 1st. It's called The Hero's Journey in Lake Tahoe, California. If you are feeling stuck, lost, in need of connection, feeling of brotherhood, join us on this retreat called The Hero's Journey. Reconnect to your inner hero. Go one step further than you thought you can go. We'll see you next time on Building Men.